A body in the icy, an arrow in his back, a wound on his hand, blood on his blade that was not his own. For 5,300 years, no one knew who killed him. DNA says otherwise. In 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps found a body protruding from melting glacier ice at over 3,000 meters above sea level. They thought it was a recent climbing accident, maybe a mountaineer who had fallen decades ago. They called the police. It took several days and a jackhammer to free the body from the ice. The extraction was rough. The tool damaged the hip. It tore clothing. It cracked bone. That damage would haunt scientists for the next 30 years. But when radiocarbon dating came back, the damage became an afterthought. The body was not decades old. It was not centuries old. It was over 5,000 years old. The oldest natural human mummy ever found in Europe. The discovery was a sensation. Every major newspaper, every television network, every archaeological journal covered it. Within weeks, 2 countries began fighting over who owned him. Austria said the body had been found on Austrian soil. Italy disagreed. A new border survey eventually placed the discovery site 92 meters inside Italian territory. In 1998, the body was moved to a museum in the northern Italian city of Bolzano, where it remains today in a climate-controlled chamber kept at precisely -6 degrees. Visitors can peer through a small window and see the mummy lying on its back, dark and shrunken behind a wall of frost. The hikers who found him became minor celebrities. They gave interviews. They posed for photographs. Years later, they would file a lawsuit demanding a finder's fee from the Italian government. The legal dispute outlasted both their lifetimes. The scientists who studied him gave him a name taken from the mountain valley where he was found. And for 3 decades, they built a portrait of who he was that visitors to the museum could see, touch, and remember. A Copper Age herder, light skin, brown hair, a thick beard, a hunter dressed in furs, caught by a sudden storm, frozen in ice within hours of his death. The museum displayed a life-sized reconstruction of this man. Thousands of textbooks reproduced it. Millions of visitors filed past it. For 30 years, scientists believed this was the Iceman. DNA says otherwise. Let us start with what the body actually told us. The mummy was remarkably well preserved. 5,300 years in glacier ice had dried the skin to dark leather, but the internal organs, the bones, the stomach contents, even the blood cells were still intact. Scientists found 61 tattoos on his body. They were not decorative. They were clustered around the joints, the lower back, the ankles, and the knees. The placement matched acupuncture points used in traditional pain treatment. He had been living with arthritis and joint pain for years. His stomach contained the remains of his last meal. It included ibex meat, red deer, and einkorn wheat, with traces of a toxic fern that may have been used as a wrapping or as medicine. He had eaten roughly 2 hours before he died. His clothing was made from the hides of at least 5 different animal species, stitched together with sinew. He wore a bearskin cap, a grass cloak for rain, and shoes stuffed with grass for insulation. His equipment included a copper axe, a flint knife, a bow that was unfinished and not yet functional, and a quiver of arrows, only 2 of them ready to fire. The copper axe was extraordinary. Copper tools of that quality were rare in his era. Owning one suggested wealth or status. The blade had been cast, hammered, and sharpened with a technique that required specialized knowledge. Whoever he was not an ordinary shepherd. His bones told the same story.
isotope analysis of his tooth enamel showed he had grown up in one valley but spent most of his adult life in a different one, roughly 60 kilometers to the north. He was mobile. He crossed mountain passes regularly. He moved between communities. And then there was the wound. An arrowhead made of flint was lodged beneath his left shoulder blade. It had entered from behind and below, puncturing the subclavian artery. For years, the accepted conclusion was that this wound killed him almost instantly by massive blood loss. A deep cut between his right thumb and index finger showed he had grabbed a blade, either his own or someone else's, hard enough to slice through the tendons. That wound had begun to heal, meaning it happened hours or perhaps a day before his death. Blood analysis on his weapons revealed traces from at least 4 other people. 3 on his flint knife, 1 on his cloak. None of the blood was his. He had been in a fight. He had wounded or killed others. And then someone had followed him to one of the highest mountain passes in the Alps and put an arrow in his back. For 30 years, the mystery of who killed him drove the research. But the research also built a picture of the man himself. And that picture, it turned out, was mostly wrong. The first major reconstruction of his appearance was based on a DNA study published in 2012. The genome was sequenced at low coverage, meaning the data was thin. The results suggested light skin pigmentation, brown hair, and ancestry linked to the Pontic-Caspian steppe, a genetic marker associated with the massive population movements that reshaped Europe about 3,000 years before the Common Era. This fit the expected timeline. By the era when the Iceman lived, steppe-related ancestry had already begun mixing into European farming populations. The Iceman seemed to confirm the pattern. He was placed neatly into the textbook narrative, part farmer, part steppe migrant, moving through the Alps as populations blended and shifted. Museums built reconstructions around this data. Light skin, brown hair, a thick beard, fur clothing, a lean, weather-beaten face staring out at visitors from glass cases in Bolzano, Vienna, and traveling exhibitions worldwide. The reconstruction became one of the most recognizable faces in archaeology. Children learned it in school. Documentaries repeated it. For over a decade, no one questioned it seriously, because no one had better data. But the 2012 study had a problem. It was built on contaminated DNA. When the body was extracted from the ice in 1991, it was handled without gloves. It was passed between officials, photographers, and curious bystanders before anyone realized its age. Modern human DNA from dozens of individuals had been deposited on the surface and had seeped into the outer layers of bone. The 2012 team knew contamination was an issue. They flagged it in their paper, but the tools available at the time could not fully separate ancient signal from modern noise. The genome they published was the best they could do with the technology of the era. By 2020, the technology had changed entirely. A team at one of the world's leading ancient DNA laboratories decided to try again. They chose the pelvis as their sampling site. It is the densest bone in the human body, the hardest for contaminants to penetrate. They drilled into the interior and extracted DNA from deep within the bone, far below any surface contamination. The sequencing achieved 15.3 times coverage. That is a level of detail roughly 15 times greater than the 2012 study. At that depth, every gene can be read multiple times and statistical noise becomes negligible. The results were published in Cell Genomics in August of 2023. The lead researcher was one of the most respected figures in the field of ancient DNA. His co-author had studied the Iceman for over 2 decades at the Research Institute in Bolzano. The findings destroyed the museum reconstruction. For 30 years, scientists believed the Iceman had light skin. DNA says otherwise. The new genome revealed he carried the darkest skin pigmentation of any European individual from his era. His skin in life was almost as dark as his mummified remains appear today. Visitors to the museum had always assumed the dark color of the mummy was an artifact of 5,000 years of preservation. It was not. That was close to what he actually looked like. The second revelation followed immediately. The museum showed visitors a man with long brown hair and a full beard. The new DNA showed he carried strong genetic markers for androgenic alopecia, male pattern baldness. By the time he died, in his mid-40s, he had likely lost most of his hair. The beard and the thick brown locks were inventions. They had never existed. The third finding was the most scientifically significant. The 2012 study had placed the Iceman within a population carrying steppe-related ancestry. The new high-coverage genome found none. There was 0 steppe contribution. His ancestry was almost entirely Anatolian Neolithic farmer. That population had migrated into Europe from what is now Turkey thousands of years before his birth, and had been slowly replaced across the continent by incoming steppe-related groups during the centuries around his lifetime. He was not a hybrid. He was a genetic relic, a man from a population that the rest of Europe was in the process of forgetting. His genome showed higher Anatolian farmer ancestry than any other European of his era ever sequenced. He was an outlier, the last of a lineage that was vanishing from the mountains even as he walked through them. For 30 years, textbooks placed him in the mainstream of European genetic history. The DNA proved he was at its margin, a survivor of a world that was disappearing. But the genome was only the first surprise. In 2025, a forensic team published a re-analysis of the Iceman's CT scans in the International Journal of Legal Medicine. They used 3-dimensional modeling techniques that had not existed when the original scans were taken in 2013. Their focus was the arrow wound. For decades, the accepted reconstruction said the flint arrowhead had torn the left subclavian artery, causing rapid death by blood loss within minutes. The new analysis found a hematoma, a mass of clotted blood approximately 110 milliliters in volume, pooled at the wound site. A hematoma of that size does not form in a body that dies within minutes. It forms in a body that is still alive, still circulating blood, still trying to heal. The Iceman survived the arrow. Not for days, but for long enough to pull the shaft from his own back. That explains why only the arrowhead was found inside the body. The wooden shaft was gone. He had removed it himself, or tried to. He may have walked after being hit. He may have crawled. The arrow had not killed him instantly. It had started a process that ended in death. But the timeline was longer and more agonizing than anyone had previously believed. And there was another revision. Botanical analysis of plant material found around the body showed that he died in late spring, not in autumn as earlier studies had concluded. Pollen grains from hop hornbeam trees, which bloom only in late spring in the alpine valleys, were found in his digestive tract. The seasonal timing was unambiguous. His body did not freeze immediately after death. It lay exposed on the mountain pass through the warm months. Insects reached it. Fly pupae were found in the surrounding soil. Decomposition had begun before the ice arrived. It was only when seasonal ice returned in late autumn that the glacier slowly covered him, beginning the 5,000-year preservation. The clean, instant death that textbooks described, a man struck by an arrow and flash frozen in a sudden storm, was a fiction. The reality was slower, more brutal, and more lonely. He died in the open, on a bare mountain pass, and no one came for him. And then the forensics turned to the question everyone wanted answered. Who did it? The arrow entered from behind and below. The shooter was standing downhill, firing upward at a target who was either resting or walking away. The arrowhead was made from a type of flint used in the southern valleys of the Alps, suggesting the killer came from the south. The Iceman's own weapons tell part of the story. The blood of 4 individuals on his knife and cloak means he had been in violent contact with multiple people in the hours or days before his death. The deep cut on his right hand was a defensive wound, the kind left by grabbing at a blade during close combat. The scenario that best fits the evidence is a pursuit. The Iceman had been involved in a violent confrontation, possibly a raid, possibly a territorial dispute, possibly something personal. He had wounded or killed multiple opponents. He fled north into the high mountains, carrying his copper axe, his unfinished bow, and a quiver with only 2 usable arrows. Someone followed him, through valleys, up switchbacks, across snowfields, to a pass at over 3,000 meters where the air is thin and the wind does not stop. The pursuer waited until the Iceman stopped moving, then fired a single arrow into his back from below. The killer did not take the copper axe. In that era, a copper axe was one of the most valuable objects a person could own. Leaving it behind suggests the killer either fled immediately or did not care about the weapon. Some researchers believe the killer feared being identified by carrying the axe back to a community that would recognize it. The body was never recovered. No one came to bury him. No one carried him down the mountain. He lay where he fell, exposed to the sky, until the ice swallowed him for 5,300 years. His community, if he still had one, either did not know where he was or did not come looking. In a world without maps, without roads, without search parties, a man who crossed a high pass and never returned simply became a silence. An empty place at a fire, a name that stopped being spoken. The killer or killers left no trace beyond the arrowhead lodged beneath his shoulder blade. We will never know his name. We will never know what the fight was about. We will never know if the killer returned home and told anyone or kept the silence of the mountains. What we know is what the evidence has always shown and what we spent 30 years misreading. A body in the ice, an arrow in his back, a wound on his hand, blood on his blade that was not his own. For 5,300 years, no one knew who he really was. DNA could not name his killer, but it gave him back his face. Darker than the museum showed, bolder than the textbooks taught, descended from a population the world had nearly forgotten by the time he was born. He was the last of his kind on that mountain pass. Someone made sure he stayed there. Discovery continues. Thanks for watching. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover DNA mysteries, ancient forensics, and the cases history tried to forget.